Combine well underway, and it is that time where we get to catch up with Shane Steichen. Last time we talked to you, as a matter of fact, was just right at the start of training camp, I think, in terms of this capacity. Appreciate the time. I'll begin with, I guess, just kind of the overview of, maybe it's asking the obvious, but in terms of your coming into this now, this is, you're entering year number 3. So you look at things now differently in what way than when you were maybe more of a wide-eyed coach coming into this process?
Yeah, I think obviously when you're coming in first-year head coach, obviously you're just, getting your feet on the ground and you're hitting the ground running and establishing what you want, from a football aspect and how you want to run things from a meeting standpoint, what you want those things to look like. And then you go into your, your first off-season training camp, you go through your first season, and then the second season, you kind of have a schedule of what you want it to look like. And then going into year 3, depending on how the first 2 years go, you're sitting at 500, back-to-back years. And obviously you're doing a lot of evaluation process after the first 2 years, to get us into that playoff hunt. So going through that right now is a big process for us.
When you look at yourself, before we get to the areas where the team needs to improve, you look at your own coaching style over the last 2 years, and you find areas that you feel you need to improve where?
Yeah, I think looking at that, it's a great question. I think obviously being the head coach, you're the leader of the football team. And every day I think messaging is very important with your culture and how you go about that. So I take pride in that as having a great message every single week and making sure the guys understand how we're trying to win a football game every single week. So there's no gray area with that. You know what I mean? So you got to make sure you're prepared on, Monday, that game review, what that looks like. Tuesday, obviously, is a player's day off. And then Wednesday, that Wednesday morning team meeting is critical. You know what I mean? I think it's very critical on setting the stage for the week and what that needs to look like and how we're going to win the football game. And then we got to go out and execute it and have a great week of preparation and practice. And then Saturday night meetings are huge too. It's a last message before you go out and take the field on Sundays. And I think that as a head coach is you got to be on that, you know what I mean? Because each year, you use information and you got to keep gathering information as you keep going. So in these off season, I'm always looking at things. I'm calling other coaches that have done it at a high level. You're reading stuff, you're looking at stuff, so you stay connected and committed, to these guys through that process.
This process is obviously, you and I were talking about it just before we went on here. Part of this is getting to know prospects, trying to get a read on what their approach is and those kinds of things. Did you guys accurately read the mentality and approach of Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, we did our due diligence there. Obviously, we did a private workout with him, spent a lot of time with him, brought him in, vetted, called coaches that he was with, coaches that I knew that had coached him, going through that process. And I think you got to turn over every rock, to figure out that person and obviously get to know him through that process, I think is a big part of it.
When, I'm sure you're no stranger to this. Shane Steichen, the head coach of the Colts here, a big buzz that came out of the last 24 hours here from the Colts standpoint is you guys and Chris Ballard talking about the open competition at quarterback. Are you as confident in Anthony Richardson today as you were 1 year ago today?
Yeah, I think with anything, we're just looking for the consistency. I said that the other day in my press conference is we're looking for that consistent player. Obviously going into year 3, been banged up the last 2 years and, playing a full 17-game season is going to be critical for his success and being consistent with his process day in and day out.
So here's one of the things, and they talked about this morning with Chris, and I thought it was a really interesting question from James Boyd, and I want to run it past you. If you're bringing in a quarterback for competition and they know that they're competing against a guy that was the number 4 player taken in the draft, the reality is, Shane, you know this. I mean, a lot of times guys get the window is maybe dictated on how they were acquired or where they were acquired. Can you honestly get a guy that comes in that feels it really is a competition as opposed to a window dressing title of it?
Yeah.
When they know they're going against a guy
I think Chris hit that the other day. I think, it's a guy that, has had production in this league, you know what I mean? I think you got to, look at it that way. And obviously we're doing our due diligence and looking, in free agency and, seeing how that thing plays out.
Could it be, will you look at quarterback in this draft?
Yeah, we always look at quarterbacks, though, every draft, no matter what.
Right.
You know, we take Anthony, 2 years ago. We still look at quarterbacks, this past season. We look at him now. Even when I was with the Phillip Rivers for years and years and years, we always did our due diligence and looked at the top guys every year because it's such an important position. So you always do, study on that.
In terms of the off-season work for Richardson, obviously we know that accuracy is still the white whale. New coach that he's going to be working with in it. Take me through just kind of the overall process and how involved you are in that day-to-day.
Yeah, obviously he's been with those guys, the last couple of years. Obviously last year was a rehab process for him with those guys, but this year is, he's healthy going into that process, and we have conversations with those guys, and obviously they, he has our information of how we do things. But I think from a biomechanics standpoint, I think that's really good to work on the fundamentals. I mean, these guys do a hell of a job with him down in Florida, and he's going through that process right now, grinding away down there. So looking forward to, when he comes back.
When you guys are analyzing the draft itself and the prospects, do you look at this draft as one where you have very specific needs and you've got to go with the best player at that need? Or are you in a position where you've got kind of needs across the board and you go best player?
I think it's a little bit of both. You know what I mean? Sometimes you do have needs that you really have to address. But obviously, if there's a really good player on the board in the draft, you don't want to pass up on a great player that can really change your football team. So I think it's a little bit of both.
How much discussion, let's say, and let me give you, I'll put it to you this way, Shane, the outside perspective, okay? I'm going to give you the perspective from a radio host, and then I want you to grade for me how accurate it is.
All right.
Okay? The radio host assumes that during the draft, Chris Ballard watches tape, interviews guys, talks to people, and then says, I really like this guy, and then goes to the head coach and says, just so you know, this is the Lego piece I'm giving you, and you figure out where it fits.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of collaboration that goes into that before the draft. Obviously, Chris and his staff and everybody, we set the draft board, and then how it plays out. Obviously, you never know how the draft's going to play out, but, we go through different scenarios, but we got to make sure, and we do make sure, is when we're drafting a guy, we got to make sure we have a role for that guy. Like, if we take this guy, how are we going to use him? And all those conversations are taking place, before the draft happens.
What's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job, that's a great question. I think there's a lot that goes into it on a daily basis. You get pulled in different directions. But I do enjoy that part of it, to be completely honest. You have an opportunity to connect with every player on your team. You're not just the offensive coordinator anymore. You're the head coach that has to connect with the offensive players, the defensive players, the special teams guys around the building, being in that leadership role on a daily basis. So I do enjoy that.
A lot of people in leadership will say they only like surprises on their birthday and Christmas. That there are always surprises and little fires you've got to put out.
Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest challenge, surprise-wise, for you in the last 2 years?
That's a good question. Obviously, last year didn't go as planned. Going 8-9, was it the end of the world? No, it wasn't end of the world. But obviously, we want to be better. We want to be in the playoffs. But I think, just dealing with some of those losses, you go through some stretches where you might lose 3 in a row, but it's keeping that team tight-knit through those times is big, and your messaging's big. You know what I mean? I think that was the biggest challenge is, having some tough losses and getting through those things. But I love the way our guys continue to fight, every week.
And speaking of messaging, and I do apologize, Shane, honestly, for consistently going to this, but it is the thing that fans want to know about, and that's the quarterback position and Anthony Richardson. The messaging over the course of the season and the benching him, the tap out, if we want to go to that. Did you as a coach, when you look back on it now, did you handle it properly from beginning to end of that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think looking back at that thing, obviously me and Anthony had conversations. Obviously the tap-out issue was what it was. I think that was a time and a place where he just needed to take a step back and see it from a different perspective. And like I said, I never said we ever lost faith in him, in that situation. So I think after that benching happened, I think he came back. He showed, some really good signs. Obviously the Jets game, he played really good. New England game, he played really good. And it would have been great to see him play the rest of the year. And obviously, he had the back spasms, to end the year. But But I wanted to make sure that me and him, like through that process, that we always connect and we're, committed to each other, and having those conversations weekly. Me and him, meet weekly, 3 days a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, one-on-one, going through the game plan, talking football and really talking life and cultivating that relationship on a daily basis.
Is the back a concern?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay, because that's good. Because when he, at one point he said he's dealt with it for a while, and in this town, when you start talking quarterback and injury, like people have PTSD, right? So you can understand why people would have that hesitation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think obviously that was just something that happened, but he's feeling good now.
Offensively speaking, when you look at your offense, you're an offensive mind, you're an offensive guru. The area that, let's say not quarterback related, that is the link that is the final piece that you feel like is kind of missing for you guys would be what?
Well, I think when you're looking at an offensive team in general, you're looking at offense, you always want to build it inside out. You know what I mean? I think it starts up front with the offensive line, making sure you guys got the guys up front that you need to go be successful. Whether you need to run it or throw it in that situation is critical, because if you can't block anybody, it doesn't really matter. But, we continue to look. I really like our wideout group. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's really good. The tight end group's a good group. So any piece that we can add to make our football team better.
Can Taylor be used in even more ways?
I don't know. He's pretty good. But we always look into that stuff. I mean, obviously, from a schematic standpoint, when we're playing teams, certain matchups, certain run schemes, he does a lot of things really well running the football. I think he's had his third 1,000-yard season this past year. So he's continued to be a great player for us, but we always look into that stuff.
Shane Steichen's the head coach of the Colts. We're here at the Combine at the Indiana Convention Center. Shane, the reality is the NFL at times can be a copycat league, right? I covered the greatest show on turf, the Rams, when they had wideouts and speed all over the place and Kurt Warner. And now all of a sudden then everybody was trying to do that and it's hard to replicate a Marshall Faulk.
Yeah.
Is there in fact a copycat that which is more dangerous? Trying to copycat what's winning or being so held to your own principles and stubborn about it that you don't make adjustment?
No, I think you need to adapt, without a doubt. I think that's the biggest thing is adaptability in this league. And I think, obviously, you have to play to the strengths of your players first and foremost. What do they do well? And then when you talk about copycat league, it is one of those things where you're playing opponents and you're going through a 5-game breakdown and you're watching that opponent and they continue to get hit on this certain run or they have problems with this. And it's like, all right, well, they haven't stopped it yet, so we need to do something like that, but let's dress it up in a different way and not run it the exact same way so it looks a little different.
So when you say what you guys do well, when you look back and you go through game by game, you guys do what well?
I think we run the ball really well. I think we ended up 8th in rushing this year, top 10 there in rushing. I think our offensive line sets the standard for running the football, which is really good.
You do what not well?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing we need to do better is we need to play complementary football. I don't think we did that very well last year, and I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis. And, it's like, shoot, if the defense gets a turnover, our offense has got to go do something with it. You know what I mean? I think that's a complementary football that makes your teams really good.
You're a parent, correct?
What?
You're a parent, correct? Okay. If you were out of town and you had to pick one player on your roster that you would most trust to be able to come and hold down the fort and watch your kids, who would you pick?
Forrest Buckner.
And the reason I thought you would go there, does that translate into the trust you have in him as a leader in your locker room as well?
Absolutely.
What makes him a leader?
One, I think he sets a standard with his play, and two, he does a great job of holding guys accountable in that locker room. I said this before the other day. I think, the best teams I've ever been around are player-led in that locker room. You know what I mean? And those guys, when the coaches aren't around, it's tight-knit in there, and I think he does a hell of a job with that.
Is there a danger in, especially with younger players, when you're holding them accountable, of holding them too accountable and thus taking away their confidence is maybe the wrong word, but you have to be aware of, like for an Anthony Richardson, when you're trying to teach him lessons, do you have to be aware of how he will respond to that versus shelling up?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think everyone is different, right? How their brains work, how their minds work. So you got to connect with that player. You know what I mean? Especially, you get a guy in the draft or free agency, you got to get that connection, that relationship going first to see what that player's like, because I don't think you can talk to every single player the same way. You know what I mean? Because guys think differently. So I think that's our job as coaches to get to know these guys and connect with these guys so we can talk to them a certain way.
Here's one for you. Give me a question or a point about Anthony Richardson that you prepared for me to ask you that I haven't asked yet.
A question about Anthony Richardson that you haven't asked me yet that I would ask him or you would ask me.
Correct.
I don't know.
Do you feel connected to him?
Absolutely. I think we've had great connection. Obviously, we went through some adversity last year, which I've said, but I think that adversity makes you stronger. You know what I mean? We still have great conversations, obviously with the NFL rules right now, but we still talk on the phone weekly, check in on them, see how things are going down there in Florida. What
do you like about this, and maybe you guys haven't gotten a chance to really dive into it, this particular draft class has really riches in what area?
I think O-line, D-line are very strong this year.
And does that mean are there some of them where you look at it and you say, I've got to evaluate, and maybe this is more a Chris Ballard question, but if there's a particular position that you feel there's a guy you really like, does the necessity to take a player at a position get based upon how much drop-off there is at that position in a later round?
I think that's a fair statement. I really do. I mean, you want to take really good players. You know what I mean? If you think there's a huge drop off from that player X compared to player B, I think there's obviously that conversation that needs to be had.
Is there a particular position at 14 that you're honed in on more than others?
I can't share that with you.
Well, you don't have to say the position, but is there one that you say, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you,
I think it depends on how the board plays out.
Right.
I really do. You know what I mean? You're going to have your guys, and, everyone goes through that process of, shoot, all right, well, this is what this team needs, and they could go this route. Boom, if this happens, this player is probably going to be there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that kind of all plays itself out, obviously through the first round. I think once you get late in the first round, it could go, who knows, you know what I mean? But obviously second and third, that's where guys are just going to start going off the board.
Here's the thing. I can tell you this. Whatever does happen, I can tell you right now, the board's going to fall exactly as I thought it was, right? That's what they always say. Isn't that's like the number one talking point every year. Well, the board went exactly. It's pretty much how we thought it was going to happen, right?
Well, last year all those quarterbacks flew off the board. You know what I mean? That was wild to see that play. And obviously we got Latu, first defensive player, off the board, at our pick.
Did you like, Latu to me, and I know everybody talked about his bend. That was a buzzword.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
At the times that you could see it, you could certainly see it. Did he unleash with the consistency that you hoped?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I think it's hard anytime a pass rusher comes in this league to have double-digit sacks. You know what I mean? I think it's very rare. I have to go back and look at the numbers. But when we watched Latu, and I studied Latu and looking at all his pressures, he had the relentless motor that you want out of a guy. He just never gave up. Even if he was right to the quarterback got it, he would turn and burst and go get it, and that's what we loved about him, and I think he's going to have a hell of a future.
When I last talked to you, it was at training camp or when we last had you on the show, and you were super excited. Like your eyes got kind of big when we were talking about A.D. Mitchell, okay? And I know that you saw a lot throughout that process to that point. Why did it not translate consistently?
That's a great question. I think every year or, every person's process and growth and development's different, and it might take some time, you know what I mean? And he still has all that talent level, you know what I mean? So I'm really looking forward to him to take, the jump into year 2 and year 3. I mean, you saw it with, Alec Pierce last year, going into year 3. He made a huge jump. So we're hoping, that AD can make that jump from year 1 to year 2.
When you think in your mind of, let's just say hypothetically that Richardson takes the step, okay, and the consistency's there. And everybody says Josh Allen. I mean, that'd be wonderful, right? You'd probably be doing backflips. You got Josh Allen. But what receiver most benefits in terms of the quarterback that you envision him to be? It most benefits who?
I think it benefits all these guys. I can't pinpoint one guy. We had 3 guys over 800 yards, and I feel really good about our receivers. I mean, Pittman's been doing it at a high level for us, the last couple of years, and Alex made a huge jump, and Downs is continuing to make plays, and then to have A.D. Mitchell come on, I think all these guys are going to benefit, and all their, the level is going to raise with all those guys.
Pittman to me when you look, especially I think now that we look back on it and know that he was maybe not 100%, you had to be impressed by just the overall. A warrior's overused, Shane, but you get what I'm saying there, right?
He's a warrior. I mean, the guy is as tough as nails, a guy that showed up, every week for his guys and played and practiced. I mean, it was phenomenal. And, to have guys like that on your team speaks volumes.
Chris Ballard admitted that at night sometimes it's hard to shut the brain off. For Shane Steichen, and I always call you the mad scientist. You're like I just imagine like all these formulas offensively running through your head. It's 3:30 in the morning. Shane Steichen's laying there, and you can't shut the brain off. It's because what, as it relates to the Indianapolis Colts, is going through it.
How can we get to the playoffs and win a championship? That's what I think about that. And obviously throughout the season, your brain's going on how do we win this football game? What can we do this week to win this football game?
Is there a danger, and your job is to obsess over it, but is there also a danger in that?
I don't think so. I think you got to be obsessed with your craft. If you're not obsessed with your craft, I think that's when you can majorly fail.
And what percent of your roster do you feel is obsessed in their craft?
I think a good chunk of them are. Like, I don't have a percentage for you, but yeah.
But you can tell if a guy's not, right?
Yeah, you can tell.
And so that's one of the things that you've got to work on. And now, Anthony Richardson, is he obsessed with his craft?
He loves football. He works at it. He grinds at it. And obviously it's going to be a big year for him going into year 3.
Going to be a big year for Shane Steichen, year 3 as well. Appreciate the time as always. Awesome. I know it's a busy time here at the Combine for you, but always good talking to you. We'll certainly see you in between now and when the season gets underway. All right?
Awesome. Appreciate you.